When I joined the Air Force, there was a World War underway very shortly, when the Japs came into the war, and honestly, I didn't expect to survive. I finished 75 missions with 75 Squadron. When I first joined 75 Squadron, they were based at Goodenough Island up in the eastern end of New Guinea. Actually, I flew up there on my 21st birthday. Goodenough Island had quite a good airstrip right along the beach there. It was graded coral. Not very good living conditions. We were living in tents. Quite often there's torrential downpours of rain, and that's not all that good, and quite often there's water runs through your tent and things like that. And of course mosquitoes is another hazard. We lived on meat and vegetable rations and bully beef. Not the best, but still it was adequate, but by and large fairly rough stuff. They varied a lot, the flying conditions in New Guinea. It wasn't advisable to fly into a cloud because there might be a mountain in the middle of it. Quite often they have cloud all around the upper areas of them. To my way of thinking, and from my experience, the Kitty Hawk was probably the best fighter we had available in the Pacific area there until the Mustang came along. The Kitty Hawk was a very tough aeroplane that would take a lot of punishment and still get you back. It had the strongest wing of any World War II fighter. It had, from memory, I think about 5 main spars in the wings. You just couldn't break it. And a fairly reliable motor. Very seldom did anybody really get into strife there. The ground crew, the 2 chaps on my aeroplane, they were absolutely marvellous. Of course, they had to sit underneath the wing of the aeroplane out of the sun for most of the day. But when we got a call to scramble and the siren went, the Kitty Hawk didn't have a self-starter, so they had to start winding it up with this big handle. And so they'd jump up and start winding, and by the time I got to the aeroplane and strapped on my parachute, they'd call out contact and I'd get the motor going. God help it me if I didn't get it going first time, because they got a bit crooked about that. But they did a wonderful job, and I always appreciated that. The Kitty Hawk was a fairly easy aeroplane to fly really, but they maintained it perfectly. We went over to New Britain for a while and covered most of New Britain. Troop movements, barges which they tried to hide up creeks and things like that, but if we could find any of them, well, we strafed them, and the Kitty Hawk with 6.5 machine guns can do a hell of a lot of damage. On one occasion we came across a fairly big vessel that had an estimated 500 or 600 troops on board, and I'm afraid they came to grief. In a strafing attack, you usually open fire at about 250, 300 yards. You've got to remember that you're doing probably 250, 300 miles an hour, and you're only going to get a very brief few seconds in which you can fire before you have to pull out. You don't want to hit the ground, and it did happen once or twice. People held their fire just a little too long and crashed, and we didn't want to lose anybody. We moved up from Cape Gloucester, I think, with 3 squadrons of Kitty Hawks just after they'd captured it, and the Australian No. 2 Aerodrome Construction Squadron moved in with their little bulldozers and filled in all the bomb craters and so on, and laid down this steel matting for us. And when we arrived, one pilot was detailed to go down and land and act as control. And he went down and, of course, naturally enough, tried to touch down right at the beginning of the runway, but what he didn't know was that there was a bit of a bump there, and he hit this bump and flipped over. He wasn't badly injured, and there were some soldiers and that around there, and they lifted up the tailplane and let him get out, and he acted as a control officer then, warned us that not to touch down too close to the beginning of the runway because of this bump. I got hit a number of times actually, and the only detriment to me was when my ground crew went crooked at me. They used to really go crooked, you know. God's sake, Blue, can't you look after our aeroplane better than that? God, think we've got nothing to do but mend the damn thing? For God's sake, be more careful. But of course they were just glad to see me back in one piece. There was a friend of mine who came up right at the end. In fact, he came up to replace me when my tour was up. And Maury Barden was his name, and poor old Maury took over my aeroplane and went out on his first job and never came back. So that was very sad. His wife, she was advised that he was missing in action. Unfortunately, I had to tell her that there was no hope. But those things happen, and in wartime, and it's inevitable. You just have to learn to deal with it.